Hi, I'm Oakland's Mayor Libby Schaaf, and this is Oakland Stories. My incredible guest today is Tommy Orange, author of the nationally renowned hit novel, There, There. Tommy, it is so awesome to have you here. I rarely have time to read. I usually don't ever read a book twice. I loved reading your book.
Thank you.
And I loved reading it not just because it was just an incredibly beautiful story and set of stories, but it had so much Oakland in it. And as a fellow native Oaklander, I feel like you captured so much about the beauty and the trauma of our city. So I know you get asked about the book all the time. I want to talk about just your growing up in Oakland. Like, what's your Oakland story? What are things you remember about Oakland as a child?
So I grew up I could see Diamond Park and the creek from my backyard. Loved going to Casper's hot dogs and Lord's, and just me and my friends. These are in the days when parents would just let their kids, go anywhere, and we just wandered in the Diamond. We'd wash cars and do yard work to try to get money to go to like Round Table Pizza, where they had a Street Fighter 2. This could sort of entertain us during the summer. So the Diamond is really where I feel like where I grew up, and the Oakland and Vista Street specifically is just, I held so many dear memories there. But I went to Redwood Heights, and we lived over just above MacArthur for a little while. So that area is also dear to me. And I went to Shiloh and off School Street and lived right behind Shiloh for a while on Humboldt. So, there are so many memories. The lake is really important to me, both from growing up and also I lived near the lake in my 20s.
Your book is just so rich with stories. Are there people from your childhood or from Oakland that informed these characters, or what are some of the Oakland stories that you think molded you as a writer?
I purposefully did not try to turn actual people into characters, because I did a lot of work in storytelling, digital storytelling. But the composite experience of everyone that I've known, and particularly my family's experience, definitely found its way into the novel. My family knows most how much our lives have influenced the characters in the novel. Some of the deeper East Oakland and that side of the novel was very much my oldest sister was involved in that life in a pretty serious way for large part of my childhood and teenagehood. And there's a lot of me in the characters, but it's definitely just, the spirit of Oakland and everyone that I've known influenced the characters. But I didn't pick particular people, because I feel you earn your stories, through hard-lived life, and to try to turn that into something that's part of fiction that didn't feel right for me.
What, Oakland's kind of known for its arts and culture scene, and it's not a traditional scene. What was your perception of kind of the cultural life of Oakland growing up? Do you feel like any of that supported you in being a writer, or was it more kind of like the city's diversity and just the lifting up of different cultures?
I was pretty uncultured as a kid, and my dad's Cheyenne from Oklahoma, and my mom's from Oakland, 3 generations back actually. There's stories in the family of a great-grandfather delivering baked goods from a horse-drawn cart in North Oakland. But we grew up Christian evangelical, went to Shiloh, but my parents met in northern New Mexico, My mom was a wandering hippie in the 70s, and my dad was there for ceremony. And they eventually moved back to Oakland, and by that time my mom had gotten saved in front of the TV in Oklahoma during the televangelical years at the beginning of that. So we didn't really grow up academic or culturally influenced aside from my dad's culture. And so I wasn't really aware of anything until I got into my 20s. I was very much into roller hockey. We started playing on the streets. This was in the heyday of rollerblading. And two Indian brothers from Philly, not native, but East Indian, they built a rink off Hagenberger. It's not that far from the Coliseum. You know the Union Bank? I think they tore it down, that Union Bank on Hagenberger, right when you got off the freeway. It's right behind that. And so I found hockey. It was somewhat young, and that was kind of my everything. So I wasn't that aware of Oakland as being what it is until I got into my 20s. And I became a musician when I was 18. I got my degree in sound engineering, and very much started to understand how rich Oakland's history is in many ways.
As I was growing up in Oakland, I had an awareness that Oakland was an urban relocation center for the native population, and that because of that we had kind of a larger native population in Oakland, but not just from the tribe that was indigenous to Oakland, the Ohlone, but really all different tribes. Was that something that you had an awareness of growing up?
In most of the classes I was in, I was the only native kid, and it was my dad at home. He spoke Cheyenne. He didn't teach us, but it was knowing who our dad was and going back to Oklahoma was more, in my childhood, was more my exposure, and sort of feeling like there weren't a lot of Native people here. It wasn't until I started working at the Native American Health Center, actually through the Indian brothers who opened the rink. Their cousin worked at the Native American Health Center, and they knew I could get a job there through him. And there's a Native preference thing where you can hire Native people over any non-Native person.
So talk about what was your first job there, and how did that mold you?
It was data entry. It was, I had very, very few skills that would apply to. It was in the behavioral health department. So I was just looking at data from Oakland's native population, but it was very mindless work. And I worked there for about 8 years off and on, and I wore a lot of different hats. And it's the behavioral health department at a Native Health Center on Fruitvale and International. So there's a lot of crazy things that happened, but they're formative in me understanding the community.
One thing that I love about Oakland is, every year someone does a survey of Oakland residents, and they always ask an open-ended question: what do you like best about where you live? And I've heard from pollsters that they don't know any other city where the most common answer to that question, it's an open-ended question, is its diversity. And I was just meeting with a group of high school students, and we went around the table and I asked them to tell me one thing they love about Oakland. The most common answer was its diversity. How did you experience Oakland's diversity growing up, and did that have any influence on you as you've become such a renowned writer?
Yeah, I think it definitely did. Coming from two different cultures is a very particular experience. But I grew up, the street that I grew up on had 6 other families they were all bicultural families. And I think that made me feel like I belonged to something, and that felt like was part of what Oakland was. And belonging is a big deal for people. And I didn't necessarily feel at the time a part of any Native community. I do now, from working in the community. But at the time, it just felt like I belonged to Oakland, and it was related to that. And the public schools that I went to had a lot of diversity too. And I think that would be my answer too. I was thinking on the way over, just what do I love most about Oakland? That's just what I was thinking coming over here, and that's the people is really what I think makes the city what it is.
I'm so excited you touched on the issue of belonging. Oakland just completed its first cultural plan in more than 30 years. And the entire theme of that plan is belonging. And you really capture it beautifully in the book that Oakland is going through gentrification, it's going through displacement. People are being pushed off their land, which is obviously a huge part of the native story. How do you see the arts and culture as creating a sense of belonging, and how important is that for this moment in Oakland, knowing what's going on?
Well, it feels a little bit hopeless, even though I'm not hopeless about it, the beast that is gentrification, because there's so many facets to it, and there's so much money, and that influence is hard to, it's a complex issue, because you have a developer that might bring in like these giant condos, and then part of it's for affordable housing, and that is part of allowing people to stay. But then you have all this money coming in and all these people that change the makeup of the city. So I think the arts and cultures, for example, you're saying this moment like Blind Spotting and Sorry to Bother You in my book, all coming in the summer. I think awareness is such a big thing for people for change. I don't always know what steps to take or what is practical. I'm not very good at doing things in the world that I know how to write, and I think awareness, and this applies to the native world too. Just awareness alone can start to make change. And when people aren't aware, a lot of things happen unconsciously, or that decisions are made that are uninformed. So I think the arts and cultures, that's what art can do, is bring to people's attention in a powerful and compelling way issues that matter. So continual funding into the arts and supporting Oakland artists in general, I think, is really important to get Oakland problems solved, because you can touch somebody through art who has influence and has money, or is friends with somebody that could make an actual change. And I believe that art can do that.
And part of your Oakland story is this $5,000 grant that you actually got from the city of Oakland. And I loved how you acknowledged that in your acknowledgments and apologized to Denise Pate, who still works for us right now, that you didn't actually do the project, but instead this book arguably helped come out of that. So I think that was $5,000, pretty well spent.
It was at $5,000 twice. I got it 2 years. So the first year I had intended to do the storytelling project. By the time the second year came around, I was already so deep into the fake storytelling project, but they didn't ask to see anything, and I really needed the help. And so it helped a great deal for 2 years.
Well, I hope that is also part of Oakland's story, that our cultural arts funding is a little non-traditional and a little more risk-taking, and really telling the stories that need to be told, and recognizing that the arts are a way that we can actually feel a sense of belonging to this place, particularly during this time of intense change. So with that, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dive a little deeper into Tommy's book, There, There.
What makes Oakland a great place to work?
The community. The community is vibrant. You can just feel the love when you come here.
I love working for the city of Oakland because of its rich diversity. That's a huge reason why I came to work here.
To make a difference in the community that I was raised in, and being able to provide the community a nice, fun, safe environment for kids to come play.
In Oakland, we want the best and the brightest who are willing to innovate and ready to serve a diverse community in one of the greatest cities in California. We're looking for everyone from librarians and building inspectors to first responders, while offering competitive pay, pension, and excellent benefits. It's never been a better time to serve your community.
I like working for the City of Oakland because as an auditor, I get to see the inner workings of government. I love hanging out at Lake Merrick, going to the farmers market on the weekends.
One day I could be working with OPD, and the next day I can be working with the mayor's office, and it allows every day to be different and new.
If you're interested in a career with the City of Oakland, please go to Oakland's NeoGov website and apply today. Join our team.
Welcome back to Oakland Stories. I'm Mayor Libby Schaaf, and I'm here with Tommy Orange, author of There, There. Now, let's just start with the title of the book. Most Oaklanders have a mixed relationship with the Gertrude Stein quote about Oakland, "There is no there, there." It's often used to kind of diss our city, but it's true that when you actually find out about the origin of the actual quote, it really had to do with this disappointment that the city was changing, that her home was gone. So tell us a little bit about why you chose that quote.
I was researching other Oakland authors because there really aren't very many. You have Jack London, who's writing about the wild, and Gertrude Stein only writing about, not writing about Oakland. So I was not a Gertrude Stein reader. I was just researching Oakland authors. Ishmael Reed wrote a great book about Oakland. But those three are pretty much the only ones that I could find at the time. And the resonance of what she was saying and the Native experience of displacement, and the struggle for identity and belonging that the characters go through, it all just felt like it fit, and I didn't quite know how. But it was just, I can't remember if I was researching for the book or for the grant, to apply for the cultural arts grant. But at some point during that time is when I stumbled upon the quote.
Oh, that's really cool. Do you have a favorite part of the book?
There's a part, I don't know that I'd call it my favorite, but I'm proud of it for a couple different reasons. At the beginning of writing, the first year after starting writing the book, we were working on a youth suicide prevention grant at the Native American Health Center. My wife was the project director. So we took them to Alcatraz and had elders who were there tell stories of their time during the occupation. This influenced one chapter that I wrote about to write it from a child's perspective. And then at the end of sort of a round of events for that grant, my wife decided to put together an author reading series for the kids, and we went to UC Berkeley, and because she was my wife, she chose me as an author, even though I'd published nothing, and I was secretly working on this novel. We had just had a son, and I would wake up at 5 a.m. to write, and when he went to bed at night, I'd write again. For the first year, a lot of the characters who are still in it came out that first year. So me, like a fraud, went in front of these kids to read something that I was writing about Oakland. So it was like the scariest reading I've done. And you really want to please the kids and reach them, but they're very hard to reach sometimes, especially when it comes to things like, reading fiction or poems, and we did both for them. So in the prologue, the end of the prologue, it's a part that's called Urbanity, and it's kind of explaining what it's like to grow up in the city and have a relationship to it, like people talk about Native people having a special relationship to the earth. And you picture a Native person and they probably are on some like cliffside with the moon in the background or something. And this was writing about like what does it feel like to be from the city, and what are the textures of the city, and what does the city sound like, and why do people connect to the city. And so I read that part to them that still remains in the book. And a couple of kids cried, and some of the kids came up and hugged me, and these kids were all from Oakland, and they were Native, and I was speaking their story, and I don't know that they'd ever heard anyone talk about it like that before. And so that that really propelled me forward in writing the book. If I could reach these kids, it's the most important thing, the most important population to reach in my heart. So that to me is an important part of the book.
Is that the part where you're talking about we're less familiar with the howl of the wolf,
mm-hmm.
than the howl of
the trains.
The trains.
Yeah.
I remember that part.
I was just on German TV recently, and they found it so fascinating. Also, there was a French journalist here at the same time. They were so fascinated by the fact that the trains came right through Jack London. So fascinated that they had me walking next to the train as part of like a B-roll segment. They just found it so bizarre that we had a train go right through there. I don't know why. I don't know that it's that unique.
Well, and I live in the neighborhood where you grow up, and you can hear the trains all night.
Yeah.
Even up in the Diamond.
Yeah, it's such a haunting sound.
Yeah. I loved that passage. The fact that even though I have a million things on my mind as a mayor, that like literally has stuck with me. The other part I loved, and I have never seen a book where people talk so much about the prologue. Your prologue got a lot of kind of attention and analysis, which is interesting because the rest of the book and the stories are so amazing. But one other thing you said in the prologue was about how we also come together. We don't just come together in cities, we also come together on the internet. And the role of technology in your book fascinated me. There's 3D printed guns, there's a drone that plays a major role. Like, talk to me about, I mean, you not only took people's image of natives off of reservations and cliffs into the cities, but you also took it into this kind of next phase of technology. Talk to me a little bit about that. I found that fascinating.
Well, I'm fascinated with future things in general, but I wrote very contemporary things on purpose to resist this image of the Native people as historical and just this one way of looking at what Native people are. And, you know, I noticed I read a lot of contemporary fiction just to kind of keep a finger on the pulse. And not that many, it's happening more and more, but there's been a resistance to writing about technology.
Usually it's written about as like this evil force that's ruining everything, like, you know, The Circle.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read that, but like, woo, that scared the
I just got
jeepers out of me.
to hang out with Dave Eggers in Idaho, strangely.
But that's why I found you were both bemoaning gentrification in Oakland, but also kind of elevating some potential good from technology.
So I wasn't sure how much technology I was going to include. I just knew I wanted it to feel very contemporary. And there's this idea not to write in certain aspects of technology or things that will date your work. And I don't really prescribe to this way of thinking. It's kind of like old white men who want their work to be read in 100 years when they're dead. And I don't care who's reading me if I'm dead. So I very much like want a novel to feel like the time that it lives in. That's part of what I love about novels myself. But I wasn't sure how much technology I was going to include. I was at an artist in residency in New Hampshire, and I was running through this problem about the metal detectors at the Oakland Coliseum, because I knew guns were going to be involved with how it was going to all end, because it sort of begins with guns and how bullets haunt people, and so I was half listening to some artist presentation. And the next artist had a 3D printer set up on a table, and he was printing something. And I was just sort of, I was hypnotized by this spooling out of this white material for this object that he was going to present for his presentation. And it just hit me in that moment how I would get the guns through the metal detectors at the Oakland Coliseum. So that's how the 3D guns got into it. I didn't initially intend that piece of technology to enter the novel.
I loved the battle between the litter picker-upper and the drone. Like, I could just see that, and there was something kind of symbolic in that, too. One of my favorite parts about your book, and if I weren't from Oakland, I still would have loved your book. But because I'm from Oakland, I just, am really passionate about your book. I think every Oaklander is going to love reading it because it's almost like Oakland is a character in your book itself. The setting is not accidental or incidental. And I love what you shared about how talking to high school students makes you the most nervous. I feel the same way. As a mayor, I'm very comfortable talking to crowds of, adults. Kids are the ones that I most want to please. And I often get asked the question, what's it like being the mayor of Oakland? And I've come up with this answer that it's the highest highs and the lowest lows. And that the hardest thing about it is that you kind of have to hold the trauma of a whole city. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, I always say, every time that Oakland breaks my heart, I wake up in the morning back in love with her again. Mm-hmm. And I felt like your book did this amazing job of kind of holding this incredible grief and trauma and harm, but also this beauty and richness. How did you do that?
I mean, I think, I have the same love for Oakland, and I think that helped to try to portray it in the most honest and true way possible, and that will have to include both of those things. And this is part of what I love about Oakland too, is that its realness comes from something hard earned. There's so much history here, and that I feel I lived through a particular Oakland experience and just came to know it. So when I went to write about it, I very much wanted to depict it as true as I could, and with love and with heartbreak. So there's not that many books about Oakland. There's some Bay Area books, but most novels take place in New York. And so I very much wanted to Oakland to feel like a character, and that you would know Oakland better having read the book.
I loved it. And then as an Oaklander, I felt like you had planted Easter eggs in the novel, like the scene in Diamond Park where the kids are going through the culvert. I know that culvert. I'm constantly yelling at my kids to not go in that culvert. Like, I know it.
Have they gone through it?
I'm sure they have. Don't.
I would hate to think of my son going through it.
Although it's shorter now. They actually daylighted a lot of the creek.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's not quite as scary.
I remember it being very long, but because it goes pitch.
Have you gone? Have you seen? But they pulled it.
I noticed some development right there, but I couldn't tell it was shorter. Everything looked smaller because I hadn't been there in a while.
But what are some of the other kind of Easter eggs that you planted in the book, knowing that only an Oaklander will get the true significance or richness of this reference?
I mean, I think all of my references were meant for Oaklanders to appreciate. I never expected other people to necessarily read it. I never expected Oaklanders to read it, really. I thought the Native community would end up reading it, and there's certain Native Easter eggs, too, that have the same thing going on. I don't know that I can think of any on the spot.
Well, I remember your description of the Eastmont Mall.
How it turned into a police station.
Which actually used to be a mall, and now it's a police station. And someone might think you made that up as part of the story, but no, that's absolutely true.
Well, and how much crime happened there. It just felt like they decided to turn it into a police station because the police were just always there.
Anyway, I just hope everyone from Oakland reads this book over and over. When we come back, we're going to talk more about Oakland's future, both our worries about it, but also our hopefulness.
The Great Migration was an outpouring of 6 million African Americans from the South to the rest of the United States of America from the time of World War I until the 1970s.
We focus on the development of West Coast blues, that wartime migration of so many cultures, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma.
Music is probably the most significant and recognizable, instantly recognizable gift of the Great Migration.
You bring these Africans over here to work for no pay, and you're gonna own them, and they're coming with this rich musical tradition that goes back thousands of years in Africa, and you put them in the fields, something happens.
The more you research black music, the more you realize everywhere black folks go, they create a musical scene of their own.
West Oakland's black community in the middle decades of the 20th century developed a rich and robust entertainment culture.
7th Street, which was the epicenter of black life. They had stores there. The movie theater was there on 7th Street.
You would see both sides of the street, businesses. You would see people walking back and forth, both sides, all black, happy, music, music, music.
The people brought the sounds that was with them. And once they became city people, the sounds evolved because they was evolving. So the music starts reflecting that.
Hi, welcome back to Oakland Stories. I'm Oakland's Mayor, Libby Schaaf, and I'm here with Tommy Orange, an amazing author, Oakland native. There, huge hit. Let's talk about Oakland's moment. Your book talks a lot about the gentrification, the displacement, and obviously there are parallels with the native experience and history of Native Americans in this country. How did you draw those parallels, and what lessons do you think that we need to be taking from them right now?
Well, gentrification as colonization wasn't actually apparent to me when I first started writing about it. I think this country has not come to reckon with its colonial past, and our current presidents will never apologize for what we are. That attitude is not going to help in slowing gentrification. As a city, I think, as we were saying earlier, supporting arts and supporting youth in big ways can do a lot. Art in the ways that it can beautify a city and the ways that it can also reach people, just different messages. The three big art things last summer that were written about in KQED, Sorry to Bother You and Blind Spotting in my book, all are touching on the same thing. And I think one hopes that reaches people in ways that can make change happen. So supporting arts with actual funding and supporting youth programming, I think, because the youth are the future, and those are two big ways to help. I don't know what to do about gentrification. It seems to have many facets, and it feels a little bit hopeless and helpless, just like with this administration, this audacious greed and a carelessness for humanity makes you feel helpless and hopeless.
I myself have to grapple with that, because obviously that's one of my responsibilities, is to not let Oakland be ruined by this moment. You have your own displacement story. You're from Oakland, but you're not living here right now. How is it that you came to get displaced out of Oakland, and did you try and move back?
Yeah, we've tried a couple times. But until the success of the book, money was a big problem. My credit has not been good. I'm getting it up into fair territory. My wife and I both lost our jobs because of a tribal. Well, we had jobs lined up, and there's a tribal leadership change, and that often that turns into a lot of people sort of clean slate for job-wise. because it's just a totally different leadership, making different decisions based on, Anyway, we couldn't afford to stay, and my wife grew up in a town called Copperopolis that's east of Stockton on the way to Yosemite.
Oh yeah, I know that place.
It's a very small town. She grew up more in Stockton. They would commute for school, and so she was more in Stockton than in Copperopolis. But her parents lived there, and so because we couldn't afford here, we moved there just temporarily, just because we didn't have anything else to do, and we're trying initially to move back, and I wasn't making that much money. I started an MFA program that was out of Santa Fe. We tried, I think, like almost every year. We were like, we're going to make it back this time, and we just haven't really been able to afford it, or the application was rejected because my creditor and hers wasn't great, and the income wasn't great either. So we're just now seriously having talks about coming back again and hoping to make it happen this time.
Well, it shouldn't take fame and incredible success for Oaklanders to return home.
Yeah. And maybe affordable housing would be a great thing to somehow expand.
Issue. I will tell you that the council passed a policy 2 years ago that when we lend money for any affordable housing project, the priority has to be for people in the immediate neighborhood, anyone from Oakland, and anyone who's been displaced from Oakland and wants to come back.
Oh, that's
gets
great.
a priority over anyone else. So there's a recognition that this is, we want Oaklanders to come back.
Yeah.
It's like people think we're suddenly so hip and cool and wonderful to be in, and they're almost kind of ruining the hipness and coolness.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But talk to me about the future of Oakland. Where do you see like the hope? What are the assets that we need to recognize and build on? What advice do you have for me as the mayor?
Well, I think those three things that we talked about, the youth and the arts and housing, I think and especially identifying people who have been dislocated and want to be back and prioritizing them, I think are the key to keeping Oakland's heart true to what it's been. I don't have the sense that it's ruined, and I've seen it in a lot of different phases since I've moved away. And I feel like you just said, the hipness and who that attracts sort of ruins it. And so I think, the people that come don't necessarily stay, and there's a certain population, I think, that's rooted and is strong. So I think there are things you need to do, but I don't feel like it's heading towards some kind of complete ruination.
Okay, I'll take that. At the end of your book, I don't want to give it away for people who haven't read it, but it's a pretty hard ending. Should we take some sense of hopefulness out of the trajectory of the lives of your characters? Or is that just the raw, honest truth that we need to face, particularly in urban America?
I think both things. The character at the end who ends the book is the one who begins it. And this is a character who has fetal alcohol syndrome. And
the drome.
Yes, he calls it the drome. He talks about how people don't want to look at him. And I think sometimes with Native issues and the way it's been is people haven't wanted to look at it because it's a really hard truth to swallow. I think ending the book in a difficult way was necessary to portray it as it is. As I was ending it, I was watching on TV the Standing Rock protests and elders getting shot with rubber bullets and pepper sprayed while praying for clean water. This seems insane. So ending it in any kind of way that maybe had a bow on it, or I felt like I ended it in the best way that I could have. I always sort of knew it was going to come to a hard ending, but there's something in it that has hope, that I hope other people get. A lot of the Native response is sort of exuberance, and they're really happy to be read and see themselves in the pages. I had a high schooler, a note passed through a teacher in Wisconsin. This was like my first high school thing. It was another scary moment, just because I didn't like high school, and I feel like I'm back in high school again if I'm in any kind of high school context. But the kids had all read it, and they loved it, and they were just as nervous as I was. And one of the kids that was too nervous to ask me a question, a Native kid in that class, she sent a note from him in an email a couple weeks ago, and just said that he was sorry that he didn't talk. He was too stunned when I was there, but that he'd never seen himself in these pages or in school, and he'd never cared about school, and this has changed him as a student. And this was an amazing email to get, to actually change one Native kid in Wisconsin. It feels like a lot to me.
That is awesome. You talked about this moment for our country and who our president is, who obviously does not like Oakland, does not like Oakland's mayor. And yet our governor recently acknowledged the genocide of Native people.
For California Indians specifically?
Yeah,
oh,
for California. Great. What do you think are some of the things that government can do now to start that healing process, to start a sense of reparations? What are some of the options?
I think acknowledgement is the first step, the key first step, to acknowledging what actually happened. There's been an institutionalized lie that we teach our children. It's either sterilized history or it's a downright lie. And we can't move forward together until something's acknowledged. I don't think Native people necessarily want anything action-wise to happen. Just acknowledging as a country, Canada has a lot more things in place institutionally where they acknowledge the land or on unceded land, like a lot of non-Native spaces and non-Native people will open up events just acknowledging. And I think it begins there. I think there's a lot of other steps, and there's a lot more funding and things that can help. But I think acknowledgement goes a long way. Our health disparities, the statistics are pretty harrowing to look at in terms of suicide rates and mortality. Like, I think we have the lowest. I think Native men's, when we're expected to die, is pretty young. Those things are harder to know how to get at because it's the fallout from history. But acknowledgement, I think, is the beginning, because we don't even really do it very much.
Although also having spaces that acknowledge that we need to have kind of customized and relevant approaches, like the Native American Health Center, where you once worked. I hope that is one step. Share, it's a pretty, must be a pretty crazy journey that you've been on. Going from, getting up at 5 a.m. to squeeze some writing time in to now being a nationally acclaimed author. Share one story with us that has been kind of a pleasant surprise from your newfound recognition.
It's been a long year. It's been out like a year and a month. There's a lot has happened. Finding out that you read it twice was a really big moment for me. Finding out that it was on Obama's year-end list was a really amazing moment. I got to travel the country and meet a lot of amazing people with my wife and son. They came with me.
How old's your son now?
He's 8.
8.
Yeah, turned 8
Perfect.
in April. And we got to go to Europe. We got to travel Europe for 6 weeks. I was partially book stuff and partially just we turned it into a vacation, because it's being translated into 23 languages now, I think is where it's at.
And I heard someone bought the movie rights?
Yeah, I don't think this is supposed to be public yet, but somebody did buy the TV rights, and it's being adapted by a Native director now, and still finding out, fingers crossed, about whether or not it'll go into production, sort of at a place where they're just trying to approve an outline. I don't even know what that is, but story-wise, nothing pops up. It's more of like finding out things about the book. Story-wise, it's a little bit more grueling and less glamorous than a book tour might sound, to be in a different hotel room every night and be living out of a suitcase. Nothing.
But you must have moments where people come up and say, reading this book changed me, or thank you for seeing me.
There was a big moment, there was two of them, the only two times I've cried in public. It was on the book tour, this woman, Lakota Harden, who's been a staple of this community for a long time, and a leader in the Native community in general. She stood up at one of my readings. I had like 5 or 6 readings in the Bay Area, and just spoke about, this was before she read the book. She just had heard about me. She just spoke about how important it was, the work that I was doing, and that I was writing what I was writing about. She came again with 2 other Native women from the community, and stood up. They all stood up, or 2 of them stood up and said just how moved they were. She said she understood her children better for having read the book, which was an amazing compliment. But just had powerful words to say about how important the book is to them. And these are Native women from Oakland, from the Bay Area. This was like feeling like I was affirmed by the community that I was writing about in a big way. So that was one of the most important moments to me, that the community I'm writing about and somebody from it could really say that it moved them and it felt true to them.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for shining a truthful light on history, and also telling an honest story, both in its pain and its beauty, about our hometown, Oakland. Tommy, thanks so much. This has been awesome. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Oakland Stories and hearing more about an amazing Oakland story. There. Run, do not walk to buy this book. Read it, enjoy it, be horrified by it, be activated by it. But all Oaklanders should hear these stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm your mayor, Libby Schaaf, for Oakland Stories.